Ancient Greece. What comes to your mind? A sterile paradise where philosophers calmly debate under marble columns, everyone dressed in white togas eating grapes. If you had a time machine and traveled to Athens in 430 BCE, the first thing you'd encounter wouldn't be Aristotle's wisdom. It would probably be that sharp stench that hits you straight in the nose. In this video, we're pulling back the curtain on the romanticized version found in history books. I'm taking you on a 2-hour journey, but this is not a tourist trip. This is a survival guide, because the moment you, a modern human, step into that era, you'll fall straight into a biological, legal, and social nightmare. If you're ready, we're powering up the time machine. Welcome, this is the real ancient Greece. You've stepped into the city. The first thing you notice is the noise. That tranquility you read in Plato's dialogues. It's not here. Vendors shouting, animals braying, the murmur of thousands of people. Ancient sources say that the streets of Athens, especially the Agora, were no different from a modern marketplace, only even more chaotic. But the real shock hits your nose. The sewage system isn't what you imagine. Waste usually runs through channels along the streets, or simply accumulates. The city smells of rotting food, animal droppings, and sweat. The sterile air we're used to in the modern world simply doesn't exist here. Your clothes are dirty now, and you want to wash up. You head to a bath and look for soap, but you won't find any, because the ancient Greeks didn't use soap. Instead, they covered their bodies in olive oil and then scraped off the oil, dirt, and dead skin with a metal tool called a strigil. In other words, their idea of cleanliness was considerably more oily than ours. You're hungry, and if you're unlucky enough to have ended up in Sparta, the menu waiting for you is melas zomos, the famous black broth. The recipe: pork meat, plenty of vinegar, and fresh pig's blood. Yes, the vinegar is there to keep the blood from clotting. There's a famous anecdote recorded by the historian Plutarch. A visitor who tasted this soup supposedly said, "Now I understand why the Spartans are not afraid of death. Because eating this every day might make dying feel like the better option." In Athens, things are a bit better, but still limited. On the streets, you might find honey-soaked dough balls similar to lucamades or roasted chickpeas. But remember, no tomatoes, no potatoes, no peppers. Those won't arrive from the Americas for nearly another 2,000 years. The kings of the table are olives, figs, cheese, and barley bread. Now we come to the most dangerous part. Who are you? If you weren't born to an Athenian mother and father, you are nothing. You are a xenos, a foreigner. There is no such thing as tourist status or passport protection like in the modern world. Unless you're under the protection of a citizen called a proxenos, you can legally be kidnapped and enslaved. You have no rights. If someone attacks you, you can't go to court. In fact, if you witness a crime, your testimony is considered valid only if extracted under torture, because they believe slaves or non-citizens would tell the truth only while suffering. What's the worst-case scenario? The Laurion silver mines. Athens' wealth came from these mines, but they were hell on earth. Slaves worked in cramped tunnels for 10-hour shifts, breathing toxic dust. Their average lifespan was only a few years. And if someone grabs you the moment you step out of that time machine, this could very well be your fate. Let's say you're lucky and you are a citizen. You want to witness democracy in action. When the assembly ecclesia meets, 6,000 people gather on the next hill. There's no microphone. The speaker must project his voice to the entire crowd. Decisions are made by counting raised hands. But be careful, this is an emotional crowd. One day they can hail you as a hero, and the next day they can expel you from the city through an ostracismos, exile vote. The historian Plutarch tells a famous story. Aristides, a just and respected statesman, was exiled simply because a farmer was tired of hearing him called the just. The farmer didn't even recognize Aristides and asked him to write Aristides' name on the ostracon, the pottery shard used as the ballot. This is how direct democracy can sometimes be brutally irrational. What about technology? The Greeks were more advanced than we often assume. In the 1st century CE, Hero of Alexandria built a simple steam engine called the Alopile. It was a rotating sphere powered by steam, but they never turned it into an industrial revolution. Why? Because slave labor was so cheap that they had no need for mechanization. This steam device was used to create miracles in temples, like doors that open automatically, or simply served as a toy in palaces. A technology that could have changed the course of civilization instead became a form of entertainment, all because of cheap labor. Foundations of the Hellenistic world and historical context. Ancient Greek civilization is one of the most defining periods in human history. The era in which the intellectual, political, and aesthetic foundations of the Western world were laid. Commonly dated from the early 8th century BCE to the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BCE. This span covers the archaic and classical periods and established a cultural hegemony that dominated the Mediterranean until the rise of the Roman Empire. However, to imagine this civilization as a unified empire or a homogeneous nation-state is a modern misconception that doesn't align with historical reality. Ancient Greece was a loosely connected collective of hundreds of independent city-states, polis, geographically fragmented, politically competitive, yet culturally and linguistically intertwined. Geography was the most fundamental factor shaping this civilization's fate. The mountainous terrain and broken coastline of the Greek peninsula made the establishment of a centralized authority nearly impossible, leading communities to develop independently in isolated valleys and coastal plains. Each polis was a sovereign state with its own constitution, calendar, units of weight, patron deities, and system of government. This political fragmentation brought intense rivalry and constant warfare, but it also created a laboratory for political experimentation, including democracy, oligarchy, and tyranny. This report aims to examine the ancient Greek world beyond the romanticized narratives of popular history, exploring the harsh realities of social stratification, the struggle for economic survival, the operational mechanisms of radical systems of governance, and the mentality that shaped the era. In the final section, the report analyzes the biological, legal, and cultural shocks a modern individual would face upon stepping into this age, presenting, from a time traveler's perspective, just how foreign a country the past truly was. Social structure and hierarchy. Citizens, foreigners, and slaves. Ancient Greek society was built upon a rigid hierarchy with very limited social mobility, a structure to which the modern concept of equality is completely alien. Social status was largely determined by birth and shaped a person's rights, obligations, and every aspect of daily life. Citizens polites the privileged minority. In the Greek world, citizenship, politia, was the highest and most coveted status. But this privilege applied only to a small portion of the population. free adult native men. In Athens, for example, Pericles' citizenship law of 451 BC required that both parents be Athenian citizens. This strict bloodline requirement effectively turned citizenship into a closed caste. Citizens held all political and legal power. Only they could own land, acquire property, vote in the assembly, serve on juries, or be elected to public office. Yet even amongst citizens, economic differences created internal stratification. After Solon's reforms, Athenian citizens were divided into 4 classes based on their agricultural production. Pentacosiomedimnoi, the wealthiest class, producing at least 500 medimnoi annually. They were eligible for the highest offices, archonships, and military commands. Hippias, horsemen, those wealthy enough to maintain a horse and serve as cavalry, 300 to 500 medimnoi. Zugitai, middle-class farmers who could afford their own hoplite armor and weapons, 200 to 300 medimnoi. The Tes, the poorest citizens, less than 200 medimnoi. Landless laborers who typically served as rowers in the navy or as light infantry. As democracy radicalized, the Tes gained political influence due to their crucial naval role. Medics, metoikoi, the unsung heroes of the economy. One of the most distinctive features of the polis system was the presence of medics, free foreigners living in the city but lacking citizenship. In commercial hubs like Athens, medics made up a significant portion of the population and dominated trade, crafts, and banking, fields often looked down upon by citizens. Their legal status, however, was precarious. They were barred from owning property, houses or land, leaving them permanent tenants. They could not participate in politics, vote, or represent themselves in court. They needed a citizen patron, prosthetes, for any legal procedure. They were also required to pay a special head tax, mitoikion, and serve in the military when needed. Despite these restrictions, some medics amassed extraordinary wealth and influence. The banker Passion, a former slave, and Kephalos, a major arms manufacturer and father of the orator Lysias, were key figures in Athenian economic life. Because medics were exempt from political duties, such as assembly attendance or jury service, they could devote their entire energy to business. The Spartan exception. Sparta was radically different. Because the state required strong mothers to produce strong warriors, girls received physical training, ate well, and moved more freely in public, with men constantly in barracks or on campaign. Women effectively managed estates and households. Spartan women could own property and inherit wealth, rights virtually unheard of elsewhere in Greece. Slavery, the dark fuel of the civilization. Greek democracy and cultural achievement rested, paradoxically, on a widespread and institutionalized system of slavery. Slaves were considered living tools, psychon, in Aristotle's words. They were property, not persons, and had no legal rights. Types of slavery. Domestic slaves, considered the most fortunate group. They lived within households, performing child care, shopping, and general chores. Some formed close relationships with their masters. Skilled slaves worked in workshops, potteries, or construction. Some talented slaves known as independent slaves, could operate their own businesses while paying a percentage of profits to their owners. Mining slaves, the worst conditions by far. In the Lorient silver mines, the economic heart of Athens, they labored in deadly tunnels filled with toxic dust. Life expectancy was short, treatment brutal. Public slaves, mostly owned by the state, serving in roles such as road construction, meant work, or even policing, like the famous Scythian archers who enforced public order. Forms of government and politics, the clash between democracy and oligarchy. The political landscape of ancient Greece was shaped by the tension between two dominant systems and the opposing worldviews they represented: Athens' radical democracy and Sparta's military oligarchy. These two models divided the entire Greek world into rival camps during the Peloponnesian War, 431 to 404 BC. 3.1 Athenian democracy, power to the people. 5th century BC Athens hosted the first and most comprehensive experiment in direct democracy in history. The term democracy derives from demos, the people, and kratos, power. There were no representatives in this system. Citizens themselves made the laws, supervised the executive, and administered justice. Ecclesia, the assembly. This was the sovereign body of the system, open to all male citizens aged 18 and over. It met about 40 times a year on the Nix Hill. The assembly made the final decisions on everything from declaring war to grain imports, legislation, and foreign policy. Attendance usually hovered around 6,000 men. The core principle was isagoria, equal right to speak. Even the poorest citizen could ascend the podium and express his opinion. Decisions were made by majority vote, through a simple show of hands. 3.1.2 Bull, the Council of 500. To ensure the massive assembly functioned efficiently, a preparatory and executive committee was required. The bull consisted of 500 members, 50 from each of the 10 tribes, chosen by lottery under the reforms of Cleisthenes. The bull set the agenda for the assembly, probuluma, received diplomatic delegations, managed daily administrative affairs. Members served one-year terms, and no citizen could serve more than twice in his lifetime. This rotation system aimed to prevent political power from consolidating in the hands of a privileged few. 3.1.3 Hiliaea, People's Courts. Athens had no professional judges or prosecutors. Justice was administered by ordinary citizens. Each year, 6,000 jurors were selected by lottery, and for each case, huge juries were formed: 201, 501, 1,001, or even more, depending on the importance of the trial. The plaintiff and defendant delivered their own speeches, timed equally by water clocks, clepsydra. Verdicts were decided by bronze voting discs placed into urns, and there was no possibility of appeal. The trial and execution of Socrates remain the most famous and widely debated example of this system. 3.1.4 Ostracism, democracy's safety valve. To protect democracy against the threat of tyranny, the mechanism of ostracismos, ostracism, was developed. When the assembly judged that someone had become dangerous to the state, Citizens inscribed that person's name on pottery shards, ostraca. Anyone receiving 6,000 votes was exiled from Athens for 10 years without loss of property. Prominent leaders such as Themistocles, Aristides, and Cimon were expelled through this process. 3.2. Spartan oligarchy, discipline and stability. Sparta embodied the opposite model to Athens. Based on the legendary laws of Lycurgus, the Spartan state was militaristic, authoritarian, and resistant to change. Its constitution combined elements of monarchy, oligarchy, and limited democracy. Dual kingship. Sparta was ruled by two kings simultaneously, from two distinct royal houses, the Agiads and the Euriponids. Their powers were limited. In peacetime, they acted as religious leaders and judges. In wartime, as military commanders. The dual king system served as a check against one-man rule. Gerousia, Council of Elders, the most prestigious institution, consisting of 28 elders, all over 60 years old, plus the two kings, making 30 members in total. The Gerousia drafted laws, served as the highest court for serious crimes such as treason and homicide. Members were elected for life by the assembly through the volume of applause. This council embodied Sparta's deeply conservative political culture. Ephors overseers. 5 ephors, elected annually by the people, wielded the true executive power. They supervised the kings, could even try them in court, controlled foreign policy, and oversaw the educational system agoj. They represented the strongest check on royal authority. Appella People's Assembly, open to full citizens, spartiates over the age of 30. Unlike in Athens, debate was not permitted. Citizens simply approved or rejected proposals from the Gerousia by shouting. Economy, professions, and trade. The ancient Greek economy was far from modern free market concepts. It was primarily agricultural, yet strongly dependent on trade due to geographic limitations and population pressures. These constraints produced a complex division of labor and a need for overseas commerce. Agriculture, the basis of life. Only about 20% of mainland Greece was arable, severely limiting agricultural output. The economy rested on the Mediterranean triad: grain, barley, and wheat, olives, and grapes. Barley was the staple food, used for maza, as it was easier to grow locally. Wheat was considered a luxury and was mostly imported. Athens especially depended on grain shipments from the Black Sea, Pontus, Egypt, and Sicily. This reliance explains its obsession with naval dominance and control of the sea routes. Control of the straits was a matter of survival. Professions and specialization. Occupations in Greek society were closely linked to social status. The ideal citizen was a land-owning farmer who could dedicate time to politics. Wage labor was often viewed as degrading, akin to a form of dependency, and looked down upon. In reality, cities like Athens were home to hundreds of professions. Major occupational categories: primary production, farmers, fishermen. Fish was the main protein source. Miners, Laurion silver mines. Quarry workers, craftsmen, Banassoi. The Kerameikos district of Athens was the center of pottery. Potters, blacksmiths, bronze workers, weapons makers, shoemakers, tanners. These jobs were looked down on by elites because they required physical labor and were done in confined workshops. Trade and services. Merchants, emplois, retailers, kapoloi, bankers, trepidati, often medics, innkeepers, barbers, professionals, doctors, architects, sculptors, sophists, paid teachers, scribes, entertainment and arts, musicians, actors, poets, the artists of Dionysus, guilds protected traveling performers, marginal or stigmatized professions, prostitutes, pornine brothels, and hetairai, educated, high-class companions, professional mourners, magicians, wages, prices, and purchasing power. To understand the Athenian economy of the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, it's essential to compare wages and prices. The basic currency was the silver drachma. 1 drachma equals 6 obols. Wages. Late 5th century BCE. A skilled craftsman or a hoplite earned about 1 drachma per day. In the 4th century BCE, inflation increased this to 2 to 2.5 drachmae. Prices and costs. Minimum daily food cost per person, 2-3 obols, half a drachma. A loaf of bread, 1 obol. A cheap tunic, 7-10 drachmae. A typical slave, 150-200 drachmae, about 6 months of wages. A skilled slave or mine worker, 300 to 500 drachmae. An ox, 50 to 100 drachmae. These figures reveal that an ordinary worker could barely afford subsistence, while real wealth came only through inheritance, large land ownership, or high-risk ventures, such as maritime trade and mining. Culture, religion, and daily life. Ancient Greek culture, unlike the modern, individualistic lifestyle, was profoundly public and outward-facing. Life unfolded not within the narrow walls of the household, but in the agora, marketplace, and civic center. The gymnasium, a space for both sports and education. And the theater. Religion, ritual, and negotiation. Greek religion was not based on a holy book or a centralized system of dogma. The core principle was orthopraxy, the correct performance of rituals. Relations with the gods operated on the principle of dueutida, I give so that you may give. Sacrifices, offerings, and festivals were performed to appease divine wrath and secure favor. Domestic worship. Every household possessed a sacred center dedicated to Hestia, the goddess of the hearth. Offering a libation to Hestia before meals reinforced family unity and the sanctity of the home. Small household shrines also honored Zeus Theseus, protector of property, and Hermes, guardian of thresholds. Public festivals. The Athenian calendar was saturated with religious festivals. The most magnificent of these was the city Dionysia, the great festival of Dionysus. Held in the spring, it brought the entire city together in the theater to watch competitions in tragedy and comedy dedicated to the god of wine. These performances were not merely entertainment but civic education, where political and moral issues were dramatized. Another major celebration, the Panathenea, was dedicated to Athena. It included athletic contests, and a grand procession to the Acropolis. Magic and superstition. Alongside rational philosophy, magic and superstition were integral to daily life. Cursed tablets, katadesmoi, thin sheets of lead inscribed with maledictions, were used against legal opponents, business rivals, or unwanted lovers, consigning them to the attentions of chthonic deities. Belief in the evil eye, Maddie, was widespread, and amulets served as protection. Legal status. The deadly risk of being a Xenos. Human rights were not universal. They were limited to citizens. Anyone outside the polis had virtually no legal standing, no legal protection. Your modern passport is worthless without a citizen proxinos acting as patron. You are legally equivalent to property. An attack in the street would leave you defenseless. Enslavement. An unprotected foreigner could be captured and sold into slavery. Being physically healthy, tall, and well-formed by ancient standards would increase your market value. Torture. If you witnessed a crime, your testimony would only be valid if extracted under torture basanos, as Greek law assumed that truth emerges only through physical pain. Psychological and sensory shocks. Athens was far from a white marble dream city. Smell and sight. Streets were narrow, muddy, and full of waste. Blood from slaughtered animals, decaying refuse, and unwashed crowds created a trauma-inducing olfactory environment. Noise and darkness. Streets were unlit at night. Venturing out after sunset was dangerous due to both criminals and human waste disposed in public. Survival strategies. Would modern knowledge, engineering, medicine, geography help? Technological incompatibility. You cannot build a computer. No electricity or silicon chips exist. Simple steam devices, like herons, could be made, but the abundance of cheap slave labor made mechanization unnecessary. Prophecy. Predicting a solar eclipse or performing basic chemical experiments could temporarily grant the status of a seer, but it was a dangerous game. Accused of asabiah, impiety, or cursing the city could result in execution. Best strategy. Use physical strength or craft skills to ally with a medic artisan and live a low-profile life. Ancient Greek civilization bequeathed humanity a unique legacy in democracy, philosophy, theater, and architecture. Yet, this legacy was built upon slavery, the exclusion of women, constant warfare, and a ruthless social hierarchy. While Athenian democracy created a radical space for freedom and participation for its citizens, the cost of that freedom was borne by slaves, women, and allied cities. For a modern observer, ancient Greece is an intellectual treasure to admire, but not a home to inhabit. A journey there might begin with the dream of conversing with Plato, only to end in a silver mine as a slave or struggling through a deadly plague. This analysis highlights the profound value of historical progress in human rights, medicine, and technology, and underscores the danger of romanticizing the past. Ancient Greece, the cradle of democracy, philosophy, and art, but also a world of slavery, women confined to their homes, infant mortality, and constant warfare. If you traveled to that era, within 24 hours, you would likely fall ill from contaminated water, be ostracized as a barbarian, someone who doesn't speak Greek, or find yourself in the middle of a battle. The past is fascinating to visit, but a brutal place to live. Appreciate modern medicine, human rights, and a warm shower.